2023, 6 p.m. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Trustee Van Gemert, could we have attendance, please?
All board members are present with the exception of Michelle Southwood.
Thank you, Trustee Van Gemert. Could we next have the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Where is public comment? So public comments at the end.
I think that's what the agenda says. Introductory comments to it.
Okay. So tonight, first item on the agenda, introductory comments, item 2A, community viewing and feedback opportunity. All meetings and interviews are open to the public, are being live streamed, cablecast, and recorded for later viewing. Recordings and information on the superintendent search are available on the Board of Education webpage. Those present at the interviews and watching remotely may provide feedback to the board for its consideration at www.bloomfield.org/feedback. So items 3A and B will be interviews with Dr. James Woell and Carol Bacchi-Diglio, followed by public comment. I'd like to reiterate that public comment is an opportunity for the public to address the Board of Education. It is not a time for dialogue. In the interest of time, the Open Meetings Act provides that boards may place limits on the time allotment for an individual comment. In addition to making public comment, you may also email the board at this time. Any comment that contains profanity, threats, defamatory remarks, or is directed at any person not employed by the district or member of the Board of Education in their official capacity and related to the role and responsibilities for which they are employed or serve, or is otherwise exempt from First Amendment protection, will be excluded from public comment. If you are speaking on behalf of a group or organization, please identify whom you represent. Thank you for taking the time to address the Board of Education. A reminder that the public comment will be 3 minutes. Is that right?
Correct.
And we will stick to that time interval per person. Also, we request that public at the end refrain from commenting on the candidates today. You're welcome to comment on the process, but not the candidates themselves. Thank you. All right, so moving on to the next item, item 3A, superintendent candidate interviews. Dr. Jim Woell, superintendent from the Benjamin School District 25, West Chicago, Illinois. Good evening, Dr. Woell. On behalf of Bloomfield Hills Schools, I'd like to welcome you to this interview for the position of superintendent. You are currently superintendent of Benjamin School District 25 in West Chicago. So welcome here tonight. I will take a few moments to briefly describe our format. The interview may take up to 90 minutes. There will be 21 questions from the board, and towards the end of the interview, time permitting, we will give you the opportunity to ask questions of the board and make a closing statement. We will let you know if time is becoming an issue and there's a need to pick up the pace of responses. For those watching this interview, we welcome your feedback. Whether present in the audience or watching via live stream or video, you may use the QR code provided for this purpose. All of the task of choosing our next superintendent is the responsibility of the Board of Education as the elected representatives of this community. We value and seriously consider the input of all our stakeholders in this process. So with that, I'll move on to the 21 questions. So Dr. Woell, while we've had the opportunity to review your application materials, audience members have not. Could you please briefly review your background and share with us what causes you to be interested in this position at this point in your career?
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to have been selected to this point in the interview process. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to meet all of you. I know that these processes can be grueling and take a long time, and so I appreciate very much and respect your time. And I'm very humbled and grateful to be here this evening. So thank you for welcoming me to Bloomfield Hills School District. I appreciate that. At this point in time, I've been in education for just over 33 years. I've spent time as a teacher, as an administrator, both at the building level and then central office, and now as a superintendent. I have worked in districts in Michigan as well as in Iowa and most recently in Illinois for the bulk of my career. Illinois is set up a little differently than Michigan in terms of its districting. Currently, I am the superintendent of an elementary district, so I have two schools. It's a small district. One is an elementary school, pre-K through grade 4, and one is a middle school, grades 5 through 8. Currently, we house about 650 students. My prior position was assistant superintendent for human resources in Elmhurst District 205, which would be much more similar to Bloomfield Hills. About 8,500 students, 17 schools, about 1,100 employees, 3 different unions, and that was my most recent large district experience. I was there for 5 years. So I honestly was not considering a move at this point in my career. And then John from the Michigan Leadership Institute called me and said, you know, I've been looking over your materials that you started messing with in our application system, and said, I think you might be a good fit as a candidate for Bloomfield Hills. And from a personal note, I have parents that are aging. They live up in northern Michigan. They're about 5.5 hours away from me right now. And as I was actually dealing with that is when John called. And I said, you know, everything happens for a reason. I would not have expected his phone call. I got it. And then I thought, I really should look into this because these things don't just drop in your lap for no reason. And so I started researching the Bloomfield Hills School District. And the more I read, the more I liked. And I understand that, of course, you're touted as the best school district in Michigan on your website, or one of the best. And this particular district, because you run the gamut, you're similar to a unit district, K-12, a large school district with the progressive views that you have, the hands-on experiences and the varying programs that you provide for your learners is pretty amazing. And so that intrigued me greatly as I continued to do some more reading and some more research about your district. And so I thought, well, I don't have children at home anymore. They're all left the nest. Would it be an opportunity for me to return to my roots in the state of Michigan, which is where I was born and raised, and then to see this particular school district and all that you have to offer to your community, to your parents in your community, to the students in your community, is something that impressed me greatly. And I thought I'd really like to try and be a part of that. And so that is why I applied and completed that part of the process. And I'm very, again, grateful to be here today, sitting with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Woell. Moving on to the next question. What are the immediate challenges you would expect to face as our superintendent? And given these challenges, tell us how you would hit the ground running on your first day and be ready to address these challenges.
Well, I think any time that you come into a new position, the biggest challenge that you face is getting to know the people, the concerns, the issues, what's going well, what hasn't gone well, and what are the areas in which the board has said, we need to focus. This is a concern for us in our community. So learning as much about that before day one is key as you come to a new place of employment and you're trying to learn the history, the climate, the culture, the people, and any concerns that the community has expressed or that the board sees as an opportunity for growth. So Looking at immediate challenges, I don't know all of the details. I understand that there have been some challenges recently. I'd like to understand those more deeply, and I would like to then work with the board to say, okay, what is our approach? How do we need to address these? How do we involve and engage the community? What are the steps and the processes that have been used that have been successful for the board? What are some processes that the board has used that maybe didn't go as well as they planned for them to go? So I'd like to have a much deeper understanding of what those challenges are. I think it's very difficult to know exactly what to expect walking in, but I think the more research and the more knowledge that I would have as a superintendent coming in, the better off I would be at being able to discuss those things with the board and determine a path forward that would allow us to address those transparently, openly, and honestly with the community.
Thank you. Given your research and what you know of our district so far, what do you believe are the two or three most critical long-term priorities we will need to address? And then how would your background and skills help us address those priorities?
I understand currently that one of the priorities that is of concern is the nature of diversity and how diversity is addressed, how diversity is met, taking a look at it through the lens of what is equity, and equity and fair are not always the same things. So how do you bring the board and the community together to foster a deeper understanding of what this diversity concern is, and then how do we bring people together so that we can come and find common ground as we look to move forward? That's one, I think, of your long-term priorities, because once you get a handle on the diversity issue and the understanding from your community, you would be able to move the district forward. From another standpoint, your academic gains are impressive, your test scores are impressive. I think one of the challenges that faces a district when they are performing well, and they are a high-performing district, is what's next. How do we identify the path to move our students forward, not just those that are hitting it out of the park on their first try, but those that are struggling, perhaps those that are on a different path as they leave the district and move on to what's next. How do we prepare them? What is going to be their pathway? Are there career opportunities and pathways through the high school and with local colleges or trade schools? How do we ensure that every student that walks through the doors of Bloomfield Hills has the opportunity to learn, grow, and be successful in an area in which they are interested, so that they are prepared for the remainder of their life, whether that be at a four-year institution, at a trade school, whatever it might be? How do we ensure that we are continuing to move the district forward on a path of excellence? So that's kind of where I come from. As far as my background and skills, I've been involved in some of this work primarily in Elmhurst 205, where we developed career and partnership pathways at York High School. We had a business pathway, manufacturing pathway, we had a nursing pathway. All of that was developed during my time there, and while I wasn't in charge of that, I was a huge part of, as we implement these programs, what does that look like for a change in working conditions for our teachers? How do we ensure that our teachers have the professional development and support that they need to be successful in fostering these opportunities for our students? Diversity is a huge issue. In Elmhurst, the community is diverse, and trying to make sure that there is equitable representation across all stakeholder groups, from the leadership of the district, whether it be at the board level or in the district office, and then fostering that through our buildings and to our families and our communities. We are operated on a neighborhood school principle, so just about everybody in that district, their elementary students, could walk to their elementary school. And each neighborhood has its own challenges and priorities, so how do you ensure that there is equity for opportunity as well as facilities in each of those neighborhood schools? So it's looking at the overall programs, it's assessing whether or not you have specialized needs in certain neighborhoods, and then how do you work together to address those to make sure that all students have the opportunities that they deserve to be successful. So I believe those experiences would help me here in Bloomfield Hills.
Thank you. John?
What is your experience with threat assessments, and what have you learned from these experiences?
Good question. It's also on the top of everybody's mind these days with everything that's happening in our world. I recently attended a full-day training sponsored by the Homeland Security Administration in DuPage County, where threat assessment was discussed. I'm part of a threat assessment task force in DuPage County. We meet on a quarterly basis with all other school districts, law enforcement, fire and safety protection, representatives from Homeland Security. Been pretty deeply involved in, most recently, the development of a resolution that has been adopted by multiple districts in DuPage County that basically it's an agreement under this task force that districts will provide help to one another. So we pay a nominal fee for supplies for this program, and then if a school is in crisis, we volunteer to send our people who are equipped, whether it be social workers, psychologists, counselors, to those schools to help provide assistance and service. So looking at it from the support of when there is a threat, how do we respond? I believe our response to threat assessments has been enhanced greatly through my involvement as well as our district's involvement with this particular group. I'd say the most important lesson that we've learned is no matter what threat you face, no one can actually write a textbook that's going to say you do step A, step B, step C, and step D every time that there is a threat or a threat assessment. You can do the threat assessment piece as a routine basis if there's something that comes up within your building, but if it's an outside threat, it is very, very challenging to say that here's step 1, 2, 3, and 4. So engaging and making sure that all law enforcement agencies that service your community are on the same page with you as a school district, understanding and establishing the chain of command, who's actually in charge, who's going to be speaking to the media, how are we ensuring that our students are safe, that our community is informed, and that we have the resources at our disposal to handle any threat or any emergency that comes our way, are critical pieces of developing a threat assessment response plan. I believe that I've had quite a bit of experience in the development of these, and fortunately, I've never had to implement any of them other than in drill format or exercise. But you can never be too prepared.
Superintendents are often faced with the challenge of making decisions when there is no clear right answer, and members of the community are split on the right path forward. Talk about a time when you were faced with a difficult decision where you knew there would be a group of people unhappy with your decision no matter what you chose to do. How did you go about making that decision and getting people on board with the direction you determined was best?
Well, we had this little thing called the pandemic that hit us all in the spring of 2020. And my community, while it's small, is very involved and engaged in our school district management and input. So we had this masking issue that I think every school district in the nation dealt with. And the state determined, our governor determined, that masks were going to be required in our schools. And we had a group of parents, community members, that were against masks being worn in schools, and we had a group of parents, obviously, that were for masks being worn in school. In order to address the concerns of that split group within our community, I worked with the board and I advised them to hold special board meetings that would allow parents in the community to come forward, much as your public comment would work here. We extended public comment to hear from both sides. Everyone who came to the meeting was allowed to speak. They had their say. We did not limit their time. And we met for over an hour and a half and heard from all community stakeholders on both sides of that equation. At the end of the day, the mandate came down, and our board made the determination that because it was a mandate, a legal mandate, that we would follow the mandate. And as soon as the mandate was lifted, we would have a plan in place for us to exit from mandated mask wearing. And so that was the decision of the board. The community did not all appreciate that, but that was our platform that we stood on, that we would follow the mandates of the governor. And so we did. In February, that was in July and August of 2020. In February of 2021, the mandate was deemed to be unconstitutional and it was lifted. So on Monday evening, I believe it was Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, we had a board meeting. On Tuesday, the Joint Committees on Administrative Rules in the state of Illinois struck down the mandate, And on Wednesday, we held an emergency board meeting to share the plan that had been in development and was being developed for an exit strategy with the community. We had a lot of people come, and they were angry because they wanted to know what the board was going to do now that the mandate was lifted, and we had been standing on the platform that the mandate must be followed. And so we heard public comment, we went into executive session, we came back, we presented the exit ramp plan, and all of a sudden you could hear a pin drop. And all of the people that were against masks stood up and said, "Thank you for your time. We appreciate the approach that you've taken," and our plan eliminated the requirement for masks. It did recommend that people still wear them, but it gave them choice. And then we based our exit strategy on specific numbers of infections at our own facilities and within our local school district community to indicate different levels of threat, and when we got to a certain percentage, masks would be required. And that was the end of our meeting, and we didn't hear another word about masks. So I believe that when you work together with a board and you do that collaboratively and openly and honestly and transparently, and you present that to your community, that good things happen, even if not everybody's going to be happy with every decision that you make. At least you have a rationale that's been explained, and there's light at the end of the tunnel when you know that you're going to be in a period of transition.
What impact has the use of standardized testing results had on our public education system?
Standardized testing has its place, and it has its purpose. Standardized testing literally takes a snapshot of your students and where they are academically at that moment in time. And while it is an indicator, it should not be the only indicator of student growth and success. It is important that your assessment system incorporate local assessment data, longitudinal assessment data, and also targets not just those that are being academically successful, but those that are struggling academically, so that you can develop real-time interventions and educational changes in the classroom based on real-time data. So while standardized testing and their results have their place and their purpose, I believe that they have become more high stakes for different admissions to different schools, and that it doesn't take a holistic longitudinal view of student growth and success. That's it.
All right. Thank you. How do you think various stakeholders, such as parents, staff members, and community members, should be involved in our planning process in setting direction for the district?
As I mentioned before, I'll sit before I tell you what you see is what you get. I am a very open, honest, and transparent individual. I believe that our taxpayers, who are constituents within our districts, who trust their students to our school system, need to have their voices heard. However, it is also the purview of the board as elected representatives within a community to make the decisions that they believe will be best for all students within the district. I believe it's important that those stakeholder groups are engaged in the process, whether that be through community forums, town hall meetings, focus groups. I saw that your strategic plan was set to, I think, roll this year in '23. I did not see a draft of a new plan posted on the website, so I'm a little curious as to what your process is and what it was looking like for the development of your new strategic plan, and whether or not you are involving all those stakeholder groups in that planning process. You will have differing opinions, we all know, from different community members. Not everybody's going to have the same opinion and thought. It's important to hear from anyone who wants to have their voices heard in that planning process to help determine and guide the direction of the district. So I do believe that it is important that their voices are heard and that they are involved.
Thank you. How do we create a district-wide culture of continuous improvement, planning strategically, and aligning our actions to achieve strategic outcomes?
I think first and foremost is making sure that the goals that you have set realistically represent what you want to have occur within the district. And I saw your goals 5 of them that you had on the website. I loved your portrait of a graduate. I thought that was excellent. There has to be a feedback loop. So any system of improvement, you have to have a process of implementation. You have to have a process of data gathering and analysis. You have to review and interpret that data and make a determination as to what is working, what is not working. And then you go back to it again and say, okay, this worked well, this didn't. We need to try something else and we need to move forward. That's the only way that you end up in a continuous cycle of improvement, is by committing yourselves to an improvement process and to that cycle of recurring events, to continuously look at the results, take stock of where you are, know where you are as a community, and then act accordingly to see what is next and how do you plan to improve. So I think that that is incredibly important to establish that feedback loop. I don't know if you currently use a SWOT analysis or if you use some other form of taking a look at your programs and what you do, but it is of critical importance that that is solidly developed so that you do have a path forward to continually look at your results and improve.
Last one from me. Effective and timely communication is vital to the success of a school district. Please describe the type of communication students, staff, parents, and the board should expect to receive from you.
Well, I'll start with the board. My mantra is no surprises. So if I learn of something, if I hear of something in the community, if I hear of something from an administrator, a concern, or an issue that rises to the level of making sure that the board is apprised, I will communicate directly with the board. Currently, what I do, I will text my board and say, please check your district email. There's some important information there. It's urgent. Or I may text them and say, please check your district email. It's not a 911, but you need to take a look as soon as you have an opportunity. If it's something that is, say we had in my district, police car shows up at our elementary school, lights are flashing, I need to alert the board right away and said, there's a police officer at Evergreen. I will keep you updated as soon as I know more about the situation, but just be aware in case community members contact you. So I never want the board to be surprised by a community member saying to them, hey, did you know this happened? And your answer is, no, let me check into that and get back to you. You should never be put in that situation. You should always know what's coming your way from any constituent, because if I know about it, you should know about it. So that's the easy part, no surprises. Different questions up there. So, okay, students, staff, parents, community is also part of that.
Oh, I think, yes, there we go. No, we're up
there
to
we
you.
go. Okay.
Yeah.
Nope. Okay, there we go. Parents. Currently where I am, I typically send a monthly newsletter after a board meeting to update.
That's not the question.
Yeah, that's the one that you just asked, I believe.
No, number 9, effective and timely communication is vital to the success of
Oh,
the
there we
school.
go. Thank you.
Sorry.
So you can expect that type of communication from me, pretty much instantaneous in letting you know where things stand. The same if there's any type of an incident that occurs that parents need to be made aware of. I call that the emergency must-know communications. I have to get that information out, whether it's pushed out through an email blast system, SMS text messaging. I want to make sure that our parents are in the know and that they are informed, especially as it pertains to their children, if there's a need for student safety. On a regular basis, I do a monthly newsletter to our parents. I also do a quarterly newsletter that goes out to all of our community members, not all have students in our district, to give an update on what is happening from the board level, what is happening from the community level, and how it will affect them. So I'm very regular with that. I do a weekly newsletter to all staff. I do not really communicate with students outside of the fact that I'm in the buildings a lot, and I know a lot of students by name. I spend a lot of time in the buildings, a lot of time in classrooms because we're such a small district. And so I spend a lot of time with kids, whether it's sitting with them in the lunchroom, asking them how things are going. We invite children to be part of ad hoc committee meetings where they come in. Our technology committee met recently. We invited students to come and participate. We want to hear from them what's going well for them from the technology perspective, what's not, what do they want to see improved and changed. It's critical to get their insight and their opinions as well. So communication should be ongoing, it should be regular, it should be factual, and it should also be a two-way street. So I am open to, I get a lot of emails from parents on a regular basis, from staff members. I am willing to communicate with people anytime they reach out, and I try to make sure that I am keeping the entire community apprised of what's happening.
Thank you for being here tonight, Dr. Woell. How would you ensure that our district spending is aligned with our priorities?
Well, I guess the first thing I would need to do is meet with your, I don't know what you call them here in Michigan, your business manager, or whoever your financial guru is in the district. I'd want to have an understanding of where dollars are allocated currently. Typically, I understand, at least where I am, about 80% of your revenue is going to go towards salary and benefits. You need staff so that you can actually educate children, so I understand why that is kind of important within the structure. I would like to learn from that individual about the overall budget, what percentage is spent where, what are the resources, are there any special programs that require additional resources currently? Do we have an opportunity for cost savings or redistribution or reallocation of dollars? So I would need to dive in and make sure I had a clear understanding of the district finances. I don't need to be down into the nitty-gritty details of what account codes get used to budget for different things, but I would want to know what are the priorities of the district, and is the bulk of the money that is being allocated spent on helping our students have the best education possible. I've seen the priorities on the website. I think they're very admirable. Have we looked at how much the district budget could literally be categorized as being spent on those particular outcomes and objectives that you've identified? So I would like to look at all of that, and if there's room for an opportunity to put more money toward what is going to be best for students, then let's find ways to do that. But I also understand that you're highly regarded in terms of your financial acumen as well as your financial budgeting and support. So I'm in no way, shape, or form a financial guru to tell somebody how to budget, but I would be very interested in learning as much as possible about focusing those priorities.
What opportunities do you believe budget limitations present? In tough financial times, what are your top 3 priorities?
Well, I think one of the big opportunities that budget limitations present is a review of your budget in total. What are we spending our money on? Is there an opportunity for us to make some cuts here? Do we really need perhaps this particular equipment item, or is there an expensive item that has been nice to be able to support with additional funding that maybe we received that we can no longer afford to support? But finding areas that will not have a direct impact on the overall quality of education for your students. I think that anytime you have limitations, you have to review very carefully every dollar that comes in and where every dollar is being spent. And is there an opportunity to clarify, tighten the belt, but to do so in a manner that does not impact negatively the education of your students and their programming? So I believe that's one of the opportunities that budget limitations present. In tough financial times, top 3 priorities: maintaining quality of educational programming for students, doing our best to maintain a high-quality staff who educate our students, and then also ensuring that we are exhibiting good stewardship to the constituents in the district, so that there's transparency with the community so they know and understand what it is we're trying to accomplish when times get tough.
Before we continue, I'll just let you know that we're approximately 30 minutes in. We're about halfway through, so just for your time budgeting.
Doing okay?
What?
90 minutes.
I know, we're about halfway through with the questions, not halfway through with the time.
Okay. Please describe your experiences with millage renewals, bond proposals, and sinking fund proposals. Were these experiences successful? Why or why not?
Not familiar with millages at all because we don't have them in Illinois. Bonds, I can speak to. Sinking funds, sorry, out of my realm of experience, although I am more than willing to learn. Bond proposals, we have actually done, in Illinois, we operate on a tax levy system, which is probably similar to your millage. This last year, I actually had to serve as the business manager of our district for a period of time. And that period of time actually aligned with the creation of the budget, the presentation of the budget to the board, the filing of the budget with the clerk, as well as the development of the tax levy, which would be your millage, and the filing of that. I also had 2 supplemental levies that had to be filed this year because we had a working cash bond and a life safety bond referendum that went through right before my arrival, but because we can't, our tax levy doesn't cover the cost of bond principal and interest payments every year, you have to file what's called a supplemental tax levy to cover the interest and principal payments on those bonds that you're paying off. And so this year I actually filed 2 supplemental levies so that that bond issue, which will be retired in 2025, actually we don't have to file another supplemental levy this coming fall. So that was all taken care of. So I have quite a bit of experience with tax levies and bond proposals. I am working currently with our school board. We need to plan for the selling of working cash bonds no later than April of 2025. Otherwise, what will happen is our debt extension limitation rate will drop from 41 cents to 13 cents, which would put our community on a roller coaster with their tax rates, and we don't want to do that. So the way that our limitation works, we can sell up to about $8 million worth of working cash bonds for our little tiny district, drop the tax rate by a nickel, make our community happy, and have about $8 million worth of funds available to continue infrastructure improvements. We couple that with the fact that we currently have about $17 million in working cash funds, in cash reserves. If we could also spend that down to 1 year's worth as opposed to about a year and a half's worth, we could access close to about $13 million for my little tiny 2-school district to improve our facilities, renovate buildings, building spaces, and create some pretty amazing learning spaces by renovating existing space and possibly adding on some specific additions. So I do have some experience in that arena. I think we use different language. Sinking fund proposal, that I'm just not familiar with at all, but I'd be happy to learn about it. So far, we've been very successful. We actually were able to stretch our referendum dollars from our working cash bond sales to do about $450,000 worth of projects that we did not think we would have money for because we managed the projects and they came in under budget and on time. So we were actually able to replace a few more sections of roof on our 2 buildings and complete our window replacement program ahead of schedule and not have to wait for 3 years. So I'm very pleased with that. So I believe that they've been successful, and we're currently in the process of planning for that next bond sale right now.
Thank you. Trustee Noble?
All right, well, thanks for being here, Dr. Woell.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a question regarding personnel. And how would you interact with other administrators in our district? How would you strike a balance between giving them the support and autonomy they need to lead effectively while holding them accountable as appropriate and necessary?
First of all, interacting with other administrators, whether it be at the central office level or whether it be at the building level, I think is critical for any superintendent. You need to know who your educational leaders are. My job is not to micromanage leaders in the building. My job is to make sure that those individuals have what they need to be successful, but also to have that accountability pathway of we need to make sure that we're doing what is best for students. And if there's a controversial issue that you're contemplating, we need to sit down, we need to have a conversation about that. Because I do not want to put you in the hot seat with your parents and your community any more than I want to be in a hot seat with the community or with the board because you did something that could potentially reflect negatively on and come back to haunt you in the future. So regularly meeting with those individuals, whether it be formally, informally, spending time in buildings, I want to see what's going on. I need to have a feel for the understanding of what the programming looks like in each building. I want to know what that administrator's goals are, what they see as what's next for their building, what are they looking to accomplish, with their staff? What are they looking to accomplish with their parents? What are they looking to accomplish with their students? So I will need to get to know them early on in the process and have many conversations and gain an understanding of where they are, where they're headed, and what their vision is for their own leadership within the district and with their buildings. So I believe that that open and honest communication is critical. I am not a yeller, I am not a blame layer, but I am very proactive in ensuring that I have a deep understanding of what is occurring and what is going on, because by having that open and honest communication, you can avoid a lot of potential pitfalls. There's no room for big egos when it comes to different things. We have to sit down, talk through the issues, and find a path forward that's going to be beneficial. So I think that's how I also strike that balance of supporting them and providing them the autonomy they need. A lot of it is getting just to know them and understanding what makes them tick and what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what are their opportunities for growth, and how do I support them in that growth. I've been trained as I call it a cognitive coach. So a lot of the conversations I have are really wanting to dive into things that they might be struggling with, not from an evaluative perspective, but from a conversational perspective. What's holding you back from doing the things that you really want to be doing? I had an elementary principal this year who was really struggling to be the educational leader in the building. This year, we had a lot of different things going on, and she did not have an assistant principal. She had somebody about 2 hours a day to assist with some of the day-to-day operations. And she said, I can't get into classrooms. I just can't. So what's stopping you? I've got issues with discipline. I've got issues with all these data meetings that come up, and I can't get from place to place. So what do you need? I need somebody to give me time to do that. I would go over to the elementary school, and if there were discipline issues that came up and she wasn't available 1 day a week for a half a day, I would go over and sit and give her the time to do that. That's doable in a small district like mine. It's not necessarily doable here in a large district, but my job is to support them and make sure that they can be the best leader they can be in their building. And so that's just one example. I also would go over once a week. The teachers all knew I was in the building. What can I do for you today? Well, I was just getting ready to take my kids down to their next specials. I got them. How many do you have? 14. I said, I'll take 14 down. I'll bring 14 back. They might not be the right 14, but I'll get you 14 students back in your classroom. 10 minutes is all it gave them, but it gave them 10 minutes of time that they did not have to do what they were doing, and I would spend time doing that. So it's an opportunity, again, to show support for your staff, and it doesn't take much time.
Please describe your most successful experience with building a high-performing work team.
I would say my most successful experience with this at the building level was when I became a principal. I was there for 8 years. By the time I left, I had hired over 50% of the teaching staff and 100% of the support staff. And we went from, I will call us an underachieving school, to outperforming our sister middle school on all local assessment as well as state assessment data. And that was a school that had been given they were a National Blue Ribbon school. So I built a team of teachers who were wholly and truly dedicated to finding ways to use data to inform their instructional practices. And they met daily to discuss that and to discuss their instructional practices, to figure out new ways that they could reach students. I had 2 teachers that were actually taken to the National Science Association convention who presented on the use of gaming in science at the middle school level, because they developed a gaming platform that allowed students to run experiments and learn as they went. I was very proud of that group at the building level. I was there for 8 years. Most recently, I went through some personnel turmoil in my district office where the superintendent was me. I had a part-time business manager. I had a part-time special education director. I had a full-time district receptionist. a full-time buildings and grounds person, a full-time payroll person, and a full-time assistant who was also in charge of HR. That was my district office. I went to our board and I said, this is not sustainable if you want us to continue to move in the direction that we're moving as a high-performing school district. And so I was actually able to hire a full-time business manager for the first time in the history of the district. They relied on part-time people who retired to come back and work about 100 days a year. State reporting requirements for the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund as well as teachers' retirement system have gone through the roof. There's been a lot of legislation in Illinois that has created a lot more work in finance departments in terms of transparency and reporting, which isn't a bad thing. But when you're a small district, even though you have less people, you have to file the same reports, and it takes a lot of time to do. During that time, the business manager that I hired actually did not work out well, and so I had to replace them with an interim business manager and then hire a new business manager who took on the role officially July 1st this year. I also had to replace my administrative assistant, the district receptionist, and the payroll person, and we now have an incredibly high-functioning team in our district office, and based on the feedback from our staff, they are thrilled with the changes that have been made. The transparency and communication, the ease of access to people, the willingness of people to help. We have turned around the climate and culture very, very quickly, and it has paid great dividends in terms of reestablishing trust with our people. It's been awesome.
Okay. What would you suggest in terms of a comprehensive professional development plan for our educators? Specifically, what would be the key priority areas as well as the delivery system?
First of all, I guess I would want to know what particular initiatives are in place that would require professional development. When you talk about professional development and a development plan, those plans need to be focused on an initiative or training for a specific avenue of practice that you're looking to implement. So I do believe that any comprehensive professional development plan has to include input from those that are being developed. They need to have a say in what is it that they need in order to make this initiative successful and to have it become embedded as part of long-term practice. So I think providing voice for them is critical. And then developing a plan that actually supports what they're doing on a daily basis in the classroom. Are they actually getting a benefit from this particular development? Is it of benefit to them? We recently implemented a multi-tiered system of supports in our district 2 years ago. In year one, we got a lot of pushback from our teachers because it was a change in how they did business. The expectation was they were actually gathering, using, and assessing data in their classroom and then using that data from students to inform where they were going to go next with their students in their classroom. And that led them to have to differentiate their lesson planning because not all students could just be taught to and expect, well, if you're not making it, we're going to send you out and get education elsewhere, and if you are and you're gifted, well, we're going to send you over here. It was the process of helping to equip our teachers with tools in their toolbox that allowed them to differentiate effectively across a broader spectrum. We actually brought in an outside professional development coach who was in our building for 143 days. And they worked with our staff at our elementary school day in and day out to teach them, to train them, to work with them, to model for them, to support them. We did the same thing in year two. So last year was year two. In year one, we were so successful that our little elementary school in my little tiny district was given an exemplary rating by the state because of the growth that our students showed, again, on those standardized assessments, which I don't put a ton of stock in. But it's an indicator that they grew tremendously from one year to the next. So we fell into the top 10% in the state of Illinois at my elementary school last year. So I know that our initiative is working. Key priority areas, for me, any professional development has to be focused on how are we going to enhance and make better the instruction and the learning opportunities for our students in our classrooms. That's where it has to be focused. And supporting our teachers in that endeavor so that they can use those strategies on which they're being trained to effectively administer and implement those changes so that it becomes embedded in practice. So for me, key priority area is all about the students. You can dig deeper into that and say, well, we need to have guaranteed and viable curriculum. We need to know how we're going to assess whether or not that curriculum is being implemented well. And then if it is being implemented well, once we know if our students are learning or not learning, what are we going to do about it for those students that do and those students that don't, and then those students that it's too easy for? How are we going to differentiate across that spectrum? So all of that comes from Rick Dufour's work on professional learning communities, but it's curriculum, instruction, and data. That, for me, is key to enhance student learning.
Thank you. Trustee Colon?
Thank you very much for taking the time to come here, and congratulations to making it to this stage of the process. My first question is, what experiences and success have you had with closing the achievement gap for economically disadvantaged and minority students?
Excellent question. My school district currently is fairly diverse. We're about 67% Caucasian, and then we are a mix of about 29 different languages represented, which is not as high as here. And we do have some economically disadvantaged and some minorities. Our largest minority population happens to be Hispanic in origin or in cultural origination. We actually had to start a transitional bilingual education program at our elementary school this last year. And in the state of Illinois, when you have 20 students who identify in a particular language in the same attendance center, you must then move from what's called a transitional program of instruction, TPI, into a transitional bilingual education model, which actually requires replacement of instruction in the core subject areas of math, science, social studies, and language arts in that student's native language. And so we hit the 20 student mark. And so we actually had to hire 2 additional transitional bilingual education teachers. Of course, wonderful unfunded state mandate. They don't give you the money for new staff when you have to do this. And we had to find them, and we had to develop from the ground up a new program that for parents who wanted to opt their children into the bilingual program, they had an opportunity to have their students instructed in their native language. And we have seen incredible gains in the students who took advantage in that. But what it also did was it drove down the caseload of our transitional program instructors in ESL, and it allowed us to dramatically reduce their caseloads, which allowed them to spend more time focused on the students that they saw and work with and develop their skill sets where they had deficiencies based on our access test scores that look at listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And so we have actually seen some pretty incredible gains for our English language population. Our economically disadvantaged students, there's not much of an achievement gap between those that are looked at as economically disadvantaged and those that are not. Our population in that category is not at a level where we are even considered we're considered a Tier 4 district in Illinois, which basically means we get little to no funding for what they call evidence-based funding, which goes toward our economically disadvantaged students. Our goal is to make sure that every child in our district has exactly the same access to all materials and resources that any other child has. And then if there are academic or social concerns, then we will address those in-house on a case-by-case basis to ensure that they get what they need. But we have seen some great success in closing the achievement gaps, especially with our students that are in different ethnicities, especially those with language concerns. Our minority populations are pretty intermingled. And again, we're a fairly diverse district, and we do everything that we can to make sure that we are providing them all with equal opportunity and access to our programs and to resources.
Thank you. Please give us examples of education change or reform you have initiated in your career that has led to improvements in student learning.
Well, I think the biggest one that I just really alluded to was the implementation of our multi-tiered system of supports program. Prior to my arrival, the practice in my district was if students basically did not fit into what we will call a tier 1 system of support or instruction, you use your learner's triangle, 80% is kind of your tier 1, 15% is kind of your tier 2, kids that struggle a little bit, and 5% is probably your population that might need additional support through an individualized education plan, or might have a specific learning disability. Our teachers were used to, if I teach to the 80% and I have students that are struggling, I'm not going to deal with them. If they're at the level tier 2, I'm going to send them out for reading support. They're going to go see our reading specialist. Tier 2 student, reading specialist. Tier 3 students, automatically special education. There were no system of interventions that could be worked through within the classroom, and our teachers liked that. The problem was it was fostering this idea of, well, those aren't my kids. Those are their kids. Those are the reading specialist kids. Those are the special education teachers' kids. That's not what education is about. And I believe that it is inherently important that our students who come to our schools feel that they have a home there and that they belong and that they are valued and that they are not looked at differently because maybe they're not as smart or don't learn as quickly. Maybe they just learn differently. And so this program, we got some pushback early on because we were actually training our teachers to provide tier 2 interventions to students in the regular education classroom. Our goal is to keep students in their regular classroom as much as humanly possible. Because if you pull them out, not only are they getting support in a skill deficit area, which is great, the problem is they're missing out on that core instruction in their classroom with their peers. And we know from research that's not healthy. They need to be in the classroom. So that was a huge push, and we invested heavily in that. And I'll never forget this. I sat in a data review meeting with a second grade teacher who will remain nameless, who, beginning of the year, this is ridiculous. I don't have time to look at this data. I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do that. Why are we talking about this? 2 months later, sitting in the same data meeting on a review, I can't believe how much progress my kids are making. So-and-so went from here to here. They don't need an intervention anymore. They're right back up with the rest of the class. So this was somebody who initially said, I'm not into this, to someone who said, now I see the value of it. And so supporting is important, but not letting them backslide and go back to old habits is also important. So the idea of keeping the pressure on, but supporting them with the resources that are necessary to get them to come around to a new way of doing things. Next year, this coming year, we have done away with the outside support for this program, and we've actually hired an internal instructional coach that will continue to work with our staff at both of our buildings to support this process moving forward. Because we don't want it to die, because we know it's working and it's creating great success for our students.
What is the biggest risk you have taken to do what's right for children?
The biggest risk I have taken to do what's right for children. I think any time that you're in a position of leadership, and any time you have to make a decision that isn't necessarily the most popular, whether it's with your staff or with your community, but you know in your heart it's right for kids, that's a huge risk. I'm trying to put my finger on something that just sticks in my mind outside of From a personnel perspective, I think making sure that when you hire people, if they are not what you thought they were going to be, that you are not afraid to pull the plug on an employee and send them on their way because you know you can do better for their students. I went through a process my second year in the district where I am, where I actually hired a new elementary principal. The outgoing principal retired. And I will tell you, it was nothing short of a disaster. And so went through all the right steps and the right processes, and ended up making the determination that that person was not going to be asked back at the end of their contract, which was a 2-year contract. Brought in coaching, support. Students were taking it on the chin. It was during the pandemic. Very little was being done from a leadership perspective there. And so that principal actually was removed before the end of their second year, and I brought in an interim principal to finish the year, which was definitely the right thing to do, not just for the students and the community, but also for the staff in that building. And I lost a lot of political capital with my board as a result of that experience. Things are definitely much better now. But I think when you do things like that because you know it's what's right for students, you put yourself on the line because you believe that that decision was what was going to be in the best interest of students. Trying to, outside of the MTSS program and risking political capital loss and favoritism with my teachers, that's probably the biggest risk, is knowing that going down the path you believe is the right path may cost you personally, but in the end, it's what's right, and that's what you have to do. It's been at this 33 years, and I don't know how to define the biggest risk I've ever taken. That's a stumping question, so sorry if I didn't answer it thoroughly, but that's all I got for you on that one.
That's fine.
Thank you. Could you please describe your typical style of leading and talk about situations which you might vary from that style?
Sure. Typically, I am a servant leader. I lead from a position of knowledge. I want to know what other people are thinking. I want to gather as much information and input as I can. I also am an incredibly collaborative leader. So my goal is to have a plan in place, ready to go and roll out, and then take that plan and tuck it in my bottom right-hand desk drawer. And then bring people together and talk about what needs to be done, where do you need to go, what do you need to support this, what is your plan as we develop that plan together. And the goal is to actually have it mirror the plan that's tucked in my bottom right-hand drawer. But there has to be a process in which there is collaboration, communication, and that we work together to establish a plan that will be in the best interest of our students. So it's not deception, and I learn a lot from talking to people, and a lot of times the plan I thought was the right plan can be swayed and changed. But it's truly about putting all of that information on the table and finding a path forward where there's common ground that is purely focused on what's best for kids. And I think anytime you use what is best for kids as the be-all, end-all of how you determine the path forward, you can't go wrong. And it's getting other people to see that as well. So it is rare. Occasionally it happens where, we call it the crown, where as the leader you have to pull out the crown and put it on your head and say this is the way it's going to be because this is how it has to be. But that's very, very rare. And so situations where I vary from my leadership style, they do come up, they do happen. Well, most recently, I would point to the fact that I made the determination to separate from our business manager, and I went to my Board of Education, and they said, well, you talked us into hiring somebody full-time, and now this person isn't working out, and you're saying that we need to get rid of them. And I had to explain to the board at that point in time, yes, and you hired me to be your superintendent, and part of my job is to make the determination on personnel. And while it might not be a popular recommendation to come to you and say, this did not work out, and I take the responsibility for that as the superintendent. I'm the one who brought him in. It didn't work out well. I went to the board and said, this is what I believe is the right way to do things, and the board supported that. But it's rare that I feel I'm ever in a position where I have to do that. But I can if I have to.
Thank you. What are the key elements needed to establish and maintain a good working relationship between you and the board?
Communication, communication, communication. And I'm not just saying me communicating to the board. I need a relationship with the board where the board is communicating with me, whether that's through the president or whether that's through individual trustees. It is critical that every board member knows what the conversations are between board members and the superintendent and the board. If you cannot have open and honest communication, there will not be a successful relationship between a superintendent and the board. It won't happen. So I think key elements for me, I need to get to know each one of you, not just as board trustees, but as people. What do you stand for? What makes you tick? Where are you from? Why'd you decide to serve on a school board? It's a thankless job. Nobody likes to be on a board anyway. What made you want to serve? What's good about your community? What's good about your district? What do you like about being on the board? What are the challenges that we're going to face together? What challenges are you facing now? Let's put that on the table and talk about it. And let's figure out how we can work together to make it the best possible path moving forward. So I think it's spending some time individually. I'd like to have a cup of coffee with each of you. If you don't drink coffee, we'll find tea or whatever it might be. But let's get together and have just some conversation. Let's talk about what your dreams are for the district, what your goals are, what you'd like to see happen, what your expectations are for me. That type of conversation is critical. I'll be very honest. I'm imperfect. I'm going to make mistakes. But I will tell all of you that I will own those mistakes, and I will not blame someone else for them. And we will sit down and we'll have a conversation. That's just who I am by nature. The last thing I'm a big fan of praise publicly, and if you have to have a difficult conversation, do so in private. And I think that fostering that communication and getting to know you as individuals, getting to know the board as a whole, I think is critical. So establishing that relationship, and the only way to maintain that is to continue to spend the time working on the relationship. Look at it a little bit like a marriage. You got to keep working at it. It's not just going to sustain itself and take care of itself. You have to put in the time, you have to put in the effort, and you have to work at it. And you can't be afraid to be open and honest. If something doesn't look right, if something doesn't feel right, or if you've heard something that you're concerned about, you have to be able to come and have that conversation. It's not a time for defensiveness. It's a time for, okay, thank you, I appreciate the feedback. Any suggestions? You know, I want to have that partnership and that type of working relationship. So it takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. And if I feel like I'm not getting what I'm looking for from a board, I want to be confident and comfortable enough to come to the board and say, look, here's kind of what I thought was going to happen or what I expected to hear back from you. If that's not the way it's going to be, can you help me understand what's a better way for us to communicate together? Because I don't want to ever be surprised, and I don't want you to ever be surprised. But I need that open dialogue. And at the end of the day, if the partnership has to be dissolved, it has to be dissolved. But I'd rather have it be done in a way that is open, honest, and above board, so that we aren't worried about what's happening in the background, that our conversations are just that. They're conversations that we can have together.
Thank you. How do you inspire and engage the entire school community in support of the district's vision and mission?
I think first and foremost, and I looked at the district's vision and mission. I actually included it in some of the materials you guys get to have after this interview. I was impressed, and the district vision and mission statements can be a lot of blah, 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 and they're nice words, but then how do you stand behind it? What are you actually doing in the trenches to fulfill your mission and to fulfill your vision? So if the vision and the mission were collaboratively developed with the community and with input from the stakeholders and from your staff and your students, your parents, other community members even, if that's where the development came from, you need to keep that mission and vision out in front of the community. And it needs to be touted, whether, I don't know how often you do community engagement sessions where you invite the community in, whether it's a town hall style meeting or a focus group or an open forum. How are you keeping your finger as a board on the pulse of the community? What's going well? What's not working? Give us some feedback. Similar to tonight, you've got people that can give you feedback about the candidates you interview. How are you engaging the community and giving you feedback about your vision and mission? How are you getting feedback from the community where they're telling you how well you're doing at what you said you were going to do? And then take that information and use it to redevelop or redefine the directions that you're headed with your different initiatives to make sure that you are fulfilling your mission and your vision. So I think that it's critical to communicate and to offer opportunities for all stakeholder groups to give feedback. I think that is part and parcel of what makes a community strong. There is strength in diversity. It's harnessing that diversity as a strength that's the challenge. And if you can't hear from everybody, it's difficult to say we embrace diversity.
Thank you. We're now down with the 21 questions, so we'd like to take a few minutes now to provide you with an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have for the board.
All right. What does the board see as its biggest challenge moving forward the next 2 years? What's the biggest challenge the board is facing?
Wants to take that one on?
I can take it on. We've obviously, we talked about it. We just passed a $200 million bond. Within the next, come this fall, we're consolidating from 3 middle schools to 2. We're reconfigured all of our elementary schools. So there's going to be probably the biggest change management in our district in its history. So that's the biggest thing right now in the interim that we need to get through over the next at least 6 months to a year.
Okay.
Anybody like to add to that?
I would echo that. Not only, I mean, the financial implications of continuing to oversee all the major renovations and construction going on in our schools, but streamlining to make sure that teacher placements were done properly. If they're not, how do we pivot and make sure that we're constantly improving? So to Paul's point, I mean, this is a major change management process, and trying to make it smooth and continuous for our students and staff. In that kind of situation, you have to be able to be, I think, flexible and nimble and be able to adapt to a lot of changes. So I'd say the biggest challenge that a new superintendent would face is the fact that it's not status quo. It's a unusual time in our district, which has the opportunity to be great and put into place a lot of great effective improvements, but it's a lot to juggle, I think, at once.
Well put.
I think we all have different concerns, although that's one of the biggest concerns. But for me, I really worry about staff morale right now and what's happening with our staff members within the school district. We have a lot of great teachers and a lot of great administrators, and I'd like to see them supported as best we can. And I think with all the changes causes anxiety and challenges there. And, whenever there's a leadership position change, there's a lot going on within each person that works in this large school district, and I'm just worried about maintaining people's support and feeling of support.
And do I understand correctly, you're looking for a new high school principal as well, right now?
That's
Yeah.
correct, yep.
That's correct.
So you got superintendent, high school principal, and all, I'm assuming there might be some other things happening in the background. Okay, so,
And two
Concerned about-
elementary school principals that'll be new within the next 6 to 12 months.
okay. So those are the challenges for the board. What's the biggest challenge for the new superintendent coming in?
I think to deal with what we just spoke about is the
Okay.
biggest challenge. I mean, new superintendent is going to be hitting the ground with, as I indicated before, the biggest change management. Goes to Carolyn's point, staff anxiety is at a high because of all the change that's going on. People don't like change, and we're going through one of the biggest changes in our district's history. And so the superintendent has to be there, whether Trustee Hill, she said, there's going to be, making sure the staff are in the right place, making sure they have the support they need, students have the support they need through this, which is happening in a few months. So we're going through, obviously, a change in leadership, change all around the district. It's not just, 8 years ago when we had a new high school. This is pretty much every building in the district is going through changes.
Does the district periodically do staff culture climate survey? Has that been a part of your ongoing process for improvement? Get a pulse on the finger of your staff? Has that been a part of the
No.
I'm just asking.
We talked about it a little bit. A lot of us are new on the board, so
Okay.
we've only been here I've been here 6 months. So we're learning all that has been available, but I know that we spoke about it to have like an anonymous comment section where people could voice their concerns and things like that.
I
I
was
don't think that was followed through quite.
We did get
To the
one
extent
done a couple of
we
years
wanted
ago,
it.
if I recall.
Yeah, there was a culture climate. It was done a couple of years ago. I mean, to your point, should we be doing it more to get, feedback? That's always, continuous improvement is always, that would be something that I personally would welcome, from all around, to get continuous feedback. And the best way to do that from around the district would be welcomed from my point of view.
We currently use the Energage Climate Culture Workplace Survey. It's part of the Chicago Tribune does a Top Workplace Award every year. Our district has participated since the spring of 2017, with the exception of 2022. We did not administer it. And it's an amazing climate culture survey. It doesn't cost a lot every year to access the data and use their insights. And it really gives you some good data, some good direction. It only takes staff about 10 minutes to complete. It's not a lengthy, but it really gives you some good insights and ways to address any concerns that come up as opportunities for growth. We're currently sitting at just under an 80%. We're at a 79% approval rating in my district, which is up from the last survey that was done in 2021, where we took a big hit between 2020 and 2021. So we're on a rise. But just every year, knowing that that's out there, and it's not about encouraging the staff to answer a specific way, it's encouraging the staff to answer openly and honestly. And I will tell you, there are a few people who don't like me, and it came out in the comments. It was pretty scathing, but you take the good with the bad, and you try to figure out a path forward by listening to everybody. And not everybody's going to love you, but I'm not necessarily there to be loved. I'm there to make sure that everybody's doing what they need to do in order to get work done for the kids. Talking a little bit about your bond issue referendum. When I was in Elmhurst, before I left, we passed a $167.5 million bond. And we were tearing down two elementary schools that were over 100 years old, replacing them. But in order to do that, you have to figure out a way to move kids out of those buildings. So then we're adding on to the other elementary schools in order to disperse those students for a year. We added on to the middle school to take fifth graders out of our elementary schools and move them to their future middle school. So there was this ongoing process of that redevelopment that you're talking about. Every building's being touched. How do you make sure all the moving pieces and parts are in the right place and teachers are assigned where they need to be? I left before we finished the project to become a superintendent, but the way we went about that was pretty fascinating. It's a lot of money. So a little bit of experience in that area. Never led the whole process, but.
Any other questions you may have?
I guess the only other question I would have from the board is, what do you expect from me? If I come and I'm your next superintendent, what do you expect from me? What are you looking for in a relationship with the superintendent?
I think you said it, someone who it's communication. So being able to have open, honest communication, transparently to not just talk about issues, but talk about how to fix them.
Yes.
And then beyond communication, to me, my expectation is someone who, out of the gates, would be able to work with the community. We have a community that's very involved, which is good. It's figuring out how to take all of that and use it and make sure that we're positively impacting the lives of kids and being able to be someone who can be engaged, someone who's very visible. So I would expect, with all of the change going on, with the new hires and all of this kind of transition, being visible, being able to engage with people, communicative, those are the kinds of qualities I would expect out of the gate that would make sure that all the other stuff that we kind of just expect, the normal life of a superintendent, the things that you don't really see behind the scenes, that just happens, but the stuff that allows the community to grow and build and students to feel safe in their new schools, that's really going to be the powerful attributes for the next leader coming in.
Thank you. That's great.
We've got about 10 minutes remaining. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Being here and having the opportunity to talk with you as a board, I appreciate your questions, number one. I appreciate and I'm humbled and grateful for the opportunity to be here. I have had a pretty varied career in education. Anytime that there is any type of leadership change, there's always, I have yet to see one that's gone so smoothly that nobody even says, hey, they got a new superintendent, what? There's always going to be challenges. And I think I am the type of person, I will be visible, I will be engaged, I will be open, I will be honest, there will be complete transparency. That's just how I do business. I don't have room to play games. I don't have time for that. If we are truly united and focused on what's going to be best for kids, we'll figure out a way to get that done, because that's why we're all here, is to figure that out for kids. I am incredibly excited about the opportunity. This is an amazing place. The more I read about it, the more impressed I am. And so I am just incredibly grateful to be here, to have this opportunity. I believe that my experience, my background, could be a good match. Only the board can make that determination at the end of the day. But I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here to speak with you. Thank you for giving me of your time this evening. And I will look forward to seeing how this whole process rolls out, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck as you make your decision. It's one of the true rare powers the board has, and that's the hiring, selection of a superintendent. And you want to get it right. So again, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Woell. We appreciate your interest in the superintendent position for Bloomfield Hills Schools. The board is interviewing 5 candidates this week. We will let you know on Thursday night where you stand in the search process. Thank you for your participation in this first round interview.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bring a little entry plan and some more information for you to look at it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I
Thank
give
you.
you two, one for your
Sure,
board
I'll
president
take
as well?
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for making the trip.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you. And for those who are watching, we'll take a 7-minute break and regroup at 7:30.